This has been a great turnout. We didn't expect this many people. I was thinking maybe 30 or 40. So there's 175 red chairs. They've all been taken. So there's going to be probably close to 200 people here tonight. So thank you for showing up. Yeah, give yourself a hand. 200 people. My name is Tad Peacock. I'm the Executive Director of the Benzie Conservation District, and we are pleased to be hosting this forum tonight on hydraulic fracturing. One of the reasons why we decided to have this forum is because last November we sent out an online survey, and while not that many people actually responded, probably about 50 or so, 90% of them said, and it was a survey about fracking, and 90% of them said that they would either come to a forum or would be very likely to come to a forum. So that's what made us, it's one of the things that made us decide to have this forum tonight. That sounds like there's some chairs coming. So our goal tonight, our main goal tonight is to just present facts, and we should all be aware that the Conservation District is not an advocacy group, it's not an advocacy organization. We are an information and education organization. That's not to say that some of our panel members won't be for or against fracking, but we are here solely to disseminate this information to you so you can go out and make your own decisions about fracking. So before we start, I'd like to recognize a few folks that are in the audience. Now I want to start with our board members. Will our board members please stand quickly? Okay, and we have, well, I'm going to start with way in the back is Chris Coda. Chris, would you raise your hand? Chris is the chair of the Benzie Conservation District. Then we have Carol Navarro. Carol, where are you? She's also in the back. She's the vice chair. We have Bill Henning in the blue shirt. In the middle, he's our secretary treasurer. And we have a newly elected board member, Roberta Dow. And the board member who isn't here is Greg Kindig. I want to thank the board members for their support. It's a pretty thankless job. I know they're doing it for the passion of it all, because if they were doing it for the money, they'd all be starving, I know. It doesn't take also, staff is here. Mike Jones is way in the back. He's our conservation specialist. And Amy Marizon is also in the back. And it was Amy who was the principal person putting all this together. So thanks, Amy, for that. And so the way this is going to work tonight, hopefully it's going to work. The way it's set up is that it's going to be an audience interaction kind of thing with the panel. And so if you have a question, we won't be bringing the mic to you for you to ask it out loud. We have cards that you can write your question on, and some of the staff and board members will be going around the room and collecting the cards and then bringing them up to Peter, who will then read the questions to the panel. And so if you have a card with a question, just go ahead and raise it, and we'll come around and collect it. I think we've already collected probably enough cards to last the whole evening, but that's okay. And not every question is going to be able to be read. We're sorry about that, but we'll get to as many as we possibly can. So that's pretty much the format. I am now going to turn it over to Peter. I'm going to introduce him though real quickly, and then he's going to introduce the panel. So Peter Payette is the news director at Interlochen Public Radio. He's involved with several of the programs there, including Points North, and has been at the radio station for how many years, Peter? 12 years. I'm sure many of you are familiar with him and have heard his excellent work on IPR. Peter also has deep roots in Benzie County. He has 4 generations of family that go back to Benzie County, so he's passionate about this place as much as all the rest of us are. And so we welcome Peter. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much. And thanks to the Conservation District for inviting me to be a part of this. Right here on my left is Jim Olson. Jim has been practicing environmental law for more than 4 decades. He founded the firm that is now Olson, Bisdock, and Howard in Traverse City. He lives in Benzie County, just east of Honor, and he's also part of the policy group Flow for Water. Next to him is Mel Kiogima, and Mel has been with the state in the Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals. He's been with the state for more than 30 years. Is that in DEQ, Mel? You're okay. And he went to school at Central Michigan University, as well as, I guess he had both his degrees from Central, and he lives in Traverse City. Mel, welcome. And on the end there is John Corcoran, and John and his wife Peggy own Premier Land Services. He's been in energy and telecom-related industries for more than 30 years. In the 90s, he spent a lot of time building out the fiber networks that we have, and now he does land services in oil and gas, and he lives in Traverse City as well. Okay, so we're going to give each of the members of our panel 5 to 7 minutes to lay out some of their thoughts about hydraulic fracturing. And Mel, I think we agreed we'd start with you.
My name is Mel Kiogima. I work with the Office of Oil and Gas and Minerals. I've been there for going to be 35 years in June. We recognize that hydraulic fracturing, while it may be new to many of you, it has been a practice that has been employed by the industry for some 50 years here in Michigan. I think what makes this process a little different is the development of the new technology that occurs in the oil and gas industry, which allows for an industry to drill hole straight, go down, and go right down, and continue for up to a mile or two in a horizontal fashion. What this allows for is less space utilized at the surface. Otherwise, many of these sites use a 640-acre drilling unit, which basically is one section of your township, 1 mile by 1 mile. And what it does is allows for the company to access the entire formation during the length of that horizontal drill. But when you do that, it leaves a lot of reservoir in place for it to be tapped. And what we have here is a formation that has brought this to the forefront, is a formation called the Collingwood Formation, which is a tight formation, which means it has porosity and permeability, but not to a high degree that allows for good production of oil and gas. So the industry goes in, and we do what they do what is called fracturing, or perforating at first, which is shooting holes into the casing and into the formation. And then, of course, everything has a gradient at which it's going to break down. All of the rocks that you see anywhere have what we call a fracture gradient. And so in order to cause that rock to fracture, you have to employ high pressure to it, and with the hydrostatic head of the fluid in the wellbore, as well as some pressure introduced by pumps at the surface, you achieve what is the fracture gradient of that rock. And this causes the pore spaces to open up, to connect with one another. And what it allows for is there are chemicals in here that serve different purposes through this process. And there's also about 99.5% of this fluid that goes down there is water and sand. You fracture the rock, which opens the fracture formations. You pump the sand in to allow the formations to stay open once the pressure is relieved on the rocks. This allows for the oil and gas that's in place to come to surface. The bigger concerns that appear to have occurred in this process is three that seem to come to the forefront. One is because of the long horizontal legs that are associated with these this process. It takes a high volume of water, high volume of fresh water, to cause this to happen. Second is the chemicals that are involved. While 99.5% of this is fresh water and sand, there are different varying amounts of small chemicals associated with each of these fracks, which serve different purpose down the hole. I mean, you could go into each one and explain everyone, but it's a long, complicated process. And then the third is the flowback water. Everything that you pump into it is going to come back and flow back to surface, either under natural formation pressure, or at some point maybe by introduction of a pump downhole, which pushes the water and the fluids back up to the surface. Everything that comes back out of the well is 100% contained. It flows back up into tanks that are on location. From there, they are put into water trucks that are completely contained, and they're taken to a brine disposal well at some location. And then the trucks tie into a tank system there, empty the trucks out, and then from there, from the tanks, it enters into the brine disposal well. So it is a process that is 100% contained. The chemicals, the state of Michigan has introduced, there was concern, and there remains, I guess, that there is proprietary information involved with the chemicals that are used. But even those are varying amounts. You know, every company puts a little bit more than the next company, so they're able to keep it as a company secret, I guess you would say. Well, lately the state has been putting the chemicals on their website. If you go to michigan.gov and do some searching, there are several wells listed that have used chemicals, and all of their chemical sheets are listed on the website. So the companies are becoming more and more open to this open process here. The large volume of water that is used in there in one of these wells, we do recognize that it is a large volume, but at the same time, it's a large volume in one well, where typically in one section of 640 acres, we could conceivably, or the oil companies could conceivably drill 8 different wells on this location, or in that section. And so the water usage could be comparable if they just drilled a straight hole and 8 different wells used a fair amount of water in this fracturing process. So there are some pros and cons to it, but yet the water is, like I say, contained, and chemicals are brought back up and disposed in a brine disposal well. And as I mentioned, it is a process that the industry has been employing here in the state of Michigan. We have some, I believe, 18 to 20,000 wells here in Michigan, and of those, 12,000 of them have been hydraulically fractured. So it is a process that the industry has been employing here in the state of Michigan for some time.
Okay, John.
Well, that was great. I tell you, if anybody wants to know about, the technical stuff, that was really a wonderful explanation. Thanks, man. That was awesome. How many have been to a fracturing forum before? Okay. I think it's really, really cool that you guys have all showed up. It's a participatory thing, and it's something we all have to be thinking about and trying to figure out as we go as a country how we meet our energy needs. And my company, my wife Peggy, we've represented a number of oil companies and exploration companies. We've represented wind companies and solar. I've worked for pipeline companies, putting gas pipelines across I have to tell you, as an old Catholic, you look in the mirror and you have to sometimes go, okay, am I doing the right thing here? Because I've been to these meetings. If you're doing what we do, the land guys, we're on the front lines. We're dealing with people. You've seen the gas land thing, you've seen the promised land thing, and I'm one of those guys that is leased, over 31 years, I've probably leased, I don't know, thousands of acres in Michigan and all over the country. And there's, I can't tell you unequivocally that some of the operators I've represented have been completely above board. I worry about that. I do. It's like if you go to the doctor and you've got some sort of disease, everybody goes, you know, have I got the good doctor? Same thing here. If I got the good attorney, if I got the good whatever, somebody's growing my vegetables. There's always a concern about somebody that you're putting your trust in, whether they're going to do a good job. And I think one of the great things about the state of Michigan and what Mel's group does is that because I've worked in Texas, I've worked in Oklahoma, we are fortunate, even though funding is tougher these days, and Mel would say that. We do a great job here of trying to monitor the industry that I many times represent. So it's important to me. I'm not here as an advocate for oil and gas. I'm not going to say that fracking is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm not here to do that. I'm here to tell you that we have energy choices in this country, period. And none of them are that great. All of them have a risk. We all know that. If you don't like fracking, then your choices are coal. And there's risk there. And there's side effects from coal. There's nuclear. There's, wind. And we know what happened with wind in this county. Wasn't very well received. So, and solar, there's, the bottom line is every one of them's got a drop point that has a risk involved with it. I will tell you that about the thousands of acres that I've leased, this is, you can believe this or not, but I've never had a landowner after I've leased their land for oil and gas call me and say that, that was the stupidest thing I ever did. Or, why would, this has just wreaked havoc on my property. I've never had that personally happen to me, and I've leased a lot of land. I've had people call me and say, why the hell haven't you drilled on my property? I've had that call, because they want the mailbox money thing. So, there's no easy choices, you guys. There's just not. And there's not less people on the planet. And when you're talking about our water here in this state, particularly, it's an incredibly valuable resource for us. So I'm concerned that we don't screw that up here in this state. So one of the things I'd like you to do tonight is, if you can do anything, if you have not seen the documentary called Switch, see it. Get on the internet, it's there. Take the time to watch it. And it's not it's an adult conversation about energy. And that's what we need to have. That's what's so cool about you guys being here. It's an adult discussion about the fact that this planet is getting smaller and smaller. There's more and more people, and more people want to keep the lights going. We got to figure out how to do that. So I'm an advocate for us as a country. I'm an advocate for an energy policy. I'm an advocate for why don't we have a train from Traverse City to Lansing to Detroit, high-speed rail? Why aren't we doing that? That's how I think. But I'm also an advocate for the fact that the oil companies are making, I see what they do in communities, and I see the difference they've made in Ohio and Pennsylvania when we were devastated with the recession. I saw the amount of money that they put into those communities and changed people's lives, to pay for a tractor, for education, for somebody. I mean, I've seen the positive things they do. And I always tell my buddies in the industry, one of the things that we don't do very well in the oil and gas business is we don't sell what we do well. And there's no simple straight line here. There's environmental issues, there's economic issues, and political issues, and they all kind of have to be melded into finding a way to do this in an adult fashion. So my representation here is to just be to tell you that I think natural gas is a really, really wonderful way to go if we do it right, if we do it responsibly, and that includes fracking, not without risk though. So that's all I got.
Okay. That work all right? Well, thank you, John. No, I think you started this out just right. Well, okay, I'm going to do two things. One, I'm going to just talk about some very important points that I think need to happen, and the main points I'd like to get across this evening so that you get those up front. Secondly, I'd like to discuss some of the same things that Mel and John addressed. Before I do that, I'm here tonight wearing the hat of chairman and president of an organization called FLOW. It actually stands for Flow for Love of Water. It's a nonprofit organization whose sole mission is to advance solutions in this century to save the Great Lakes. But we have found that that involves inevitably food, energy, conservation, all the threats to the Great Lakes, so that we do it with a unifying principle and based on sound science. Actually, we have some materials on the back. If you didn't pick them up when you came in, pick them up when you leave. I think we have the materials that are related to our fracking project, including educating local governments and communities on what to do at the local level. Because that's where the power lies, because the feds have pretty much exempted or staying out of it. They left it to the states, and the states are all over the place, and the regulations are, in terms of looking at the risk and doing long-term studies, are not in place. So FLOW looks at science, and we did this with fracking last summer with a science intern, and then we looked at the legal policy with a legal intern, and myself digging in as well. And in addition, who should come on board but Liz Kirkwood. And Liz is our executive director. She comes to us from Pennsylvania, but via Southeast Asia, and, Oregon, and San Francisco. She moved to Traverse City with her husband, Peter, and their children. Liz, are you here? Wave your hand. Okay. So feel free to talk to her this evening. Okay, the first thing is, look, the industry, first I'd like to talk about economics. Natural gas selling right now is a little over $4 at the price point. You need about 5 or 6 to make a profit. The companies are leasing and they are seeking permits. I think Mel would know the numbers, but I think there's been over 50 applications or so. There's probably 12 to 15 permits out there, maybe more now. Last time I looked, that's what it was. And we've got one producing well over in Kalkaska County up here in northern Michigan. And the things I'm talking to tonight have to do with horizontal or hydraulic fracking, as Mel described, but it is called unconventional or deep horizontal fracking, or shale or tight rock fracking. And that's been around in Michigan for about 5 or 7 years. Leasing didn't really start until the state lease sale in 2010, when they made $178 million off some rumors of a Chesapeake well that was supposed to be highly productive. That didn't pan out, or at least the information went the other way. The state averaged $1,500 an acre at that point, in that first sale. They're putting up, this next spring sale, they're putting it up on oil and gas leases for $10 an acre. Okay. So the environmental cost and all the other costs of this deep fracking technology and the risk that can occur, the contamination that can occur, simply is not worth it, and at the very least, we need to study it. There are no, the next point I'd make is that there really are no generic studies in Michigan going into leasing or going into permitting. Every well is looked at by itself. The DNR pretty much says, we lease. We don't look at the impacts when we lease state land. And that's what they've said in public meetings like this, where I've been on the panel. And the DEQ does not look at cumulative impacts of a bunch of wells, let's say in Benzie County, or the Platte River Valley, or the Benzie River Valley, if it were to happen here, or the Osable River. It's not happening, and it needs to happen before we move forward. We don't know the answer unless we do that. The other point I'd like to make is that the industry has pretty much conceded that frac wells, these deep, tight rock wells, play out early. It's because the rock is so darn tight. That's why it takes all that water and pressure and chemicals and sand and surfactants to hold the cracks open. It's good for that first explosion breaks the layer of rock. It might be 40 or 50 feet thick, extending miles. And the horizontal drilling might go 1 or 2 miles, just as Mel said. And the science is uncertain as to how accurate the fractures are, just how good they are. So they usually have to go back and refract. They get about 10 to 15% of gas the first time around. They keep doing it. It's quite a bit. But the most recent study, if you want to ask me what it is later, I'll show it to you. I have it with me. A Canadian expert says, look, American natural gas for the deep shale stuff is going to play out. It's going to play out early because the decline in production and i.e. profit and the economic ability to do it is maybe 6, maybe 10 years. After 10 years, there's not much there to make it worth it. Unless we go back in and start busting out more with more and more water, more and more chemicals at higher explosive rates. So it's kind of a short-term, dead-end solution to our energy issue, and I think we have to move towards renewable, which includes mass transit, just as John was saying. It includes conservation, it includes building local economies, questioning global economies that are wasting societies and gas and money just for a few. And we got to deal with this. The other thing is that there are some substantial concerns and risks. It's not 2 to 5 million gallons a well or 8 million gallons a well. It's now looking like Encana is doing their first production. In Kalkaska, they've done 1 well on 1 pad. They're doing 3 more that are in the completion process. Now you probably are, maybe you're not, maybe that's Cadillac, but yeah. But I'm talking about the Sunset Trail complex. And that's 4 wells. And now they're going to apply for 5 more. There's going to be 9 wells there in that 640-acre unit. And each of them uses 20 million gallons of water to frack once. Actually, I think they put down 23 in one application, 16 million in another. You multiply that times 9, that's 180 million. Let's say to keep those wells going because they decline early, they have to frack again. All right, that's 360 million gallons of water. And that's way more than 8 regular wells in the 640 acres. The Antrim Shale uses 50,000 gallons a well. I mean, this is like, you know, it's like completely apples and oranges. We're not talking about the same thing. And so, even if a well used 50,000 gallons, like the Antrim wells, and you had them in the different places, and you did it traditionally, and broke the rock and brought it up, that's 500,000 gallons of water. On the chemical issue, the chemicals consist of, I have a list up here from the report in the U.S. Congress, from the House, in April of 2011. You can come and look at it. Hazardous substances is a whole list. Household, yes, there's some households. Some of them are hazardous, but they call them household just because they're used in household. But when they're used in larger quantities, it's a different story. The other thing is, it's true that it's 99.5% water and sand. Now is correct about that. But 0.5% of 20 million gallons is 500,000. All right? That's a lot of chemicals. And where do they go? They do go down 1 or 2 miles, anywhere from 6 to 14,000. It really depends. Mel's a geologist, he can address this. It depends on where you are in the state. It varies. The formations are at different depth in different places. The formations are Collingwood, Utica, A1 carbonate, and there's some subcategories that I've seen, Carbondale. So the exposure risk, and they've been documented, if you want to see those, we have them in our reports, and they're listed on web pages. And yeah, you know, the films, you got films on both sides. That's why last summer at Flow, we said, I told the science intern, I said, I want you to watch both films, and I want you to tell me what's true and what's not true in the 2 films, based on the science, and I want you to read everything. And fortunately, he was, you know, I don't know what his grade point was, I don't know, 3.9 something or other at U of M. And he went at it, and he did a good job. And he said, Jim, the fracking, it's not the technology necessarily that was used in natural shale. It is a vertical well with small water and small chemicals. It's the massive scale, folks. It's an industrial scale activity. They need 640 acres because the harm can even go past that. That's why it's a big unit. Plus, they need the land in the unit to go horizontal. So those are just some of the problems. And we'll address those hopefully in the questions. I mentioned there's a lack of federal regulation, and the state regulations need to be tightened, and we need to know the answers to some of the questions I've raised, because there hasn't been one study in the state that has done that yet. The state leasing policy needs to be turned upside down so we know how much water's going. We're not getting a dime for that right now. How much is going along with the gas? And these non-development leases, they tell you nothing's going to happen. Like, I can show you the map in Benzie County.
Jim, we have a lot of questions here, so let's wrap it up.
So that needs to be done. And then finally, local governments take charge. Take charge in your own community. I'll stop there. Thank you. Sorry, I went a little long.
Okay, thanks. All right, Mel, I'd like to come back to you. A number of questions came up after you spoke, and I think Jim's raising this point about comparing a horizontal drilling in the Antrim Shale to these deep hydraulic frac jobs. So I'll read this version. It says, how does the fracking being done today compare to earlier fracking in terms of the amount of water used, content of fluid used, how the depth of the wells, and the need to store dangerous byproducts?
As I mentioned, Michigan has, I believe it's 18 to 20,000 wells here in the state. The horizontal drilling is a fairly new technology that first came around, I believe, in the mid-'80s. At the time, they did a nice slow angle, and were able to do them under each of their 80-acre units. Just do it the long way, so they did stay within their acreage that they were allowed to use. But we also cover several different formations as we go down the geological charts. The first formation as we go down is the Antrim. That's a shallow gas formation. The next we're talking about Traverse Formation, Dundee Formation, Richfield Formation, Niagaran Formation. We even go deeper to the Bob Love, Glenwood, we go down to the Prairie du Chien. We've had wells that go down what we geologists refer to as the basement rock, which is the old rocks from way back in the day. So every one of those formations are producing oil and gas to this day. And each one of them were probably, or primarily most of them were drilled on a straight hole method. That's where you just go straight down and you just kind of go perpendicular into a formation. So basically you just have one hole in that formation. And at the time, the technology was to, of course, set the pipe, And then you take a perforating gun in there and shoots out laterally into the formation, which opens casing and gets through the cement and starts into the rock. Well, the hydraulic fracturing at that time employed the same method we're using now. Same type of chemicals, except water and sand primarily, and you do the same thing. I talked about the frac gradient of rocks and what the pressures are going to take to cause that rock to fracture. And so they employed the same kind of pressure, but each one of these wells were drilled on an 80-acre unit compared to a 640-acre unit. Now that's 8 wells in a 640-acre unit. So back in the day, that was the accepted technology, to go down, perforate, fracture. Same method, same chemicals, less water. Well, as the technology progressed, we got into the horizontal fracture back in the mid-80s, I believe it was. And we slowly, the industry has got it down to a perfection now. I mean, you can go horizontally and they know when you're starting to dip an angle in it, they're measuring it the whole time. They know where they're going. So what happens now on a 640-acre unit is if you had 8 wells, you're talking about 1.5 acres to 2 acres to drill a well. Now, we could have 8 of these 2-acre sites in a section, 640 acres, or we could have one pad that's a couple of acres and cover the entire section. So with that, the process is the same, but except when you go horizontally, now you have that entire leg that is within the formation that you were intended to go down and look for. You have the whole thing exposed so you can go through, and there are natural fractures in the majority of the reservoirs that we have. The Niagara Formation, for instance, that came in.
Can I just jump in? So are you saying, because the question was specifically about water, the fluids used, and the chemicals, are you saying the chemicals used to fracture the interim shale are the same ones being used in these deep shale wells?
You know, depending on, we can sit here and talk individual chemicals already. One of the primary things.
Yes or no? Yes or no?
Yes or no? Yes or no? Ask the question.
Are they the same chemicals?
I think that's what they're asking. They want to
Are
know.
they the exact percentage-wise? Yes, same chemicals.
Okay. And what about water?
Fresh water.
How much water is used in a traditional antrim well as opposed to one of these newer?
Traditional antrim well, which is a shallow well, is about 50,000 average.
Compared to,
Some of these wells, we just had one of the Encana wells, I believe, used 21 million gallons for its crack shot.
Say again?
One of the Encana wells was just reported to have used 21 million gallons of fresh water in its fracture.
if we could, I want to come back to the chemicals, but I want to include John in this, if we can hand the mic. I assume people ask you how this is different, because I think the questions are getting at how is this different? So when a landowner who's considering a lease wants to know how this new type of drilling might be different from what he or she may be familiar with over the last 20 years for gas drilling in the interim, how do you answer that?
The impact in the water is significant. There's no question about it. It's a science experiment. This whole fracking thing has come about, and there's absolutely no question that that people are taking a significant risk to try to get natural gas out of the ground. They're spending a lot of money to do that. Now, I mean, you can shake your head and you can go, you hear 21 million gallons and your head starts to spin. I'm not sure about the facts of how long a Marcellus shale well lasts. You don't know how long a Collingwood well lasts because there just hasn't been enough of it drilled here in this state. We don't know, and we're not gonna know. So the honest answer is that when I heard the opening talk about, well, we're gonna discuss facts, I think there's a lot to be learned still about how this all works. And then when you want to talk economics, that's a big part of the equation, folks. Because if you, like I said earlier, if you decide that you're anti-fracking. And that's cool. If you say, I don't want to frack. That's, you know, you don't have to lease your land. You don't have to do that. That's fine. What are the other choices? And are there risks with that? So, you know, for all the ladies in the audience and the studies on the effect of coal and mercury in the atmosphere and uterine cancer, that's okay? I'm not anti-coal either. I'm just telling you, every one of them has a risk, period. And so when I meet in front of a group of people talking to them about leasing their land and being a part of a hydrofraction, Marcellus Shale, Utica Shale project in Ohio or Pennsylvania, where I'm doing a lot of my work now, our crews are working, I can tell you this, that it works. It's working. Now, how long these wells are going to produce, I don't know. Are they using a lot more water? You bet. Is there concern about how they're operating? You bet. That's the reality, folks. That's the reality. But I also know that people a lot smarter than I am are making it work. And communities are benefiting from it. There's an economic impact to natural gas. And I can tell you this, too. I think natural gas is a wonderful bridge, certainly for most of us. We're not going to be here 100 years from now. But between now and 100 years, natural gas is a decent bridge energy source, in my view. In my view. I would rather try to fight our way through, as Jim's trying to do here, with protecting the water, which I'm good with it. We need advocates for that. But I don't want to necessarily have our blood and treasure go to the Middle East and fight for it either. And I don't want us not to be more concerned about leaving the lights on when you leave the house and just being energy pigs. It's not just fracking. It's not just fracking. It's about a big picture here. Now, and I think the oil companies need to be regulated. I think they need to be watched, and that's hopefully what Mel's group is doing. And frankly, that's what I'm doing.
John, let me jump in. We have so many questions.
All right.
So why don't we go with the chemicals? You keep the mic. We'll come my way with it. But when people ask, what kind of chemicals are going to be injected in the ground under my property if I lease out my mineral rights, and are they toxic? Which is what a lot of people are wondering here. What do you tell them? What can you tell them?
This industry response, my response is that the chemicals are, they go way below the, what are you shaking your hands at? What are you shaking your head? What's the problem?
I've done a lot of research on this, and you are talking all the industry talking points.
Okay, let's just let him finish. He
What-
said
what
this is
I'm
what
saying
this
is
the
that-
industry response. So-
Again, the chemicals that are in that fracturing process, I've been told.
Are carcinogenic.
Just let him give the answer, please.
I am of the mind that, is it potentially a risk, potentially carcinogenic? Yes. Okay? Then again, I'll go back to this, ma'am. What choice do you have that's better?
I do have a good choice.
What is it?
We need to have alternative energy.
Okay.
We need sustainability.
Okay.
We need to change the way we live.
Okay? Do you know what I compare it to? Let me finish.
No, okay, you go right ahead.
let me-
You know what, I've heard all this.
No, but I mean, we are a fossil fuel burning economy. I don't,
Why?
what?
Because the political system is taking huge amounts of money. It's all based on economics.
Well, I'm not gonna, look,
And so are the gas and oil companies.
okay, I don't think, look, there's not saints in everything that we do, okay?
That's for sure.
Okay, all right.
And you want to know something else?
Please let them.
Ma'am, could you listen? If everyone could just be quiet.
All I'm saying
If I
to
could
you
just
is,
speak for a moment, two of these folks, including myself, have come over here from Traverse City. If everyone starts interjecting, nothing is going to get accomplished here. So if we could just let him finish, we'll hear from others on the panel. And please just let it go.
I'm not trying to spew the company line, okay? I'm not. I'm not. I'm just telling you that I tell my kids that we are like a big aircraft carrier. You can't turn, and when I say by that, I want to turn our economy to a renewable, clean, and that kind of, I'm with you, okay? But we are not going to turn our economy from a fossil fuel-based economy, turn left just like that. It's not going to happen overnight, okay? It is not going to happen. But if I have a choice between kids dying in Iraq for it and in Afghanistan for it, or drilling here for natural gas done with it can be done, I believe, in a sensible manner.
Okay, we're gonna listen. We're talking about chemicals now. If you could give the mic to Mel. Mel, you mentioned that the state, that some of these companies are now reporting what chemicals they're using. Can you tell us about the chemicals that are being reported and if they are toxic and to what degree?
If you go to our website, there is a listing of wells that have posted what they're posting are their MSDS sheets on the website. And I believe there are about a dozen of the wells that are there, and I believe they all are associated with the Collingwood Formation. But I have a list here. One of the formations we're going into is a limestone. And if anybody has taken a science class or a geology class in particular, they've taken some hydrochloric acid and scraped the limestone and dropped a little drop on it, and it fizzes up. I mean, it's just kind of a chemistry 101 project that everyone has done. Well, this is what happens down hole using hydrochloric acid. Yes, that is a toxic chemical. It is hazardous. But you use it in such an amount because you're going into a limestone formation, and what happens is you put the acid in there, and what it does is eats up some of the rock and causes the pore space to open up. And then you just flow back the waste, the flow back water, and it comes to the surface, and it goes ultimately back down into a disposal well. Some of the other things is a friction reducer, minimizes the friction of the pipe, increase a surfactant to increase the viscosity of the fluid as it's flowing. Potassium chloride creates a brine carrier type of fluid. A gelling agent thickens the fluid to suspend the proppants on its way down. A scale inhibitor, there are many types of scales that can form in a well bore, so you put in a scale inhibitor. And they're using ethylene glycol for that. And ethylene glycol is basically what you're running in your car every day. Keep it cool. pH adjusting agent, a sodium potassium carbonate, which helps other chemicals to work, be more effective. Ammonium persulfate, allowed breakdown, delayed breakdown of the gel that's being used, using borate salts to maintain the fluid viscosities. So there's a whole list of chemicals that are used in this process, and they all serve a different purpose. When you're talking 8 million gallons of water and it's only 0.5% of it, yes, it does come out to be a fairly large volume of chemicals. And so, like I say, but it is, it goes down into the formation, serves its purpose, and comes back out of the formation. And like I say, ultimately ends up in a disposal well.
And I have a question here. Someone's wondering why the state doesn't require full transparency of these companies. And if you had a desire to do that, what would it take? If it's hard to do that, or would it take legislative action?
I believe the withholding of information for proprietary purposes really gets more established at the federal level, that they have that authority to not disclose company information. It's like taking your let's say a container of chemicals. It's like a Coke product. I mean, who knows the chemistry of Coke? Well, it's proprietary information. Halliburton has a solution of hydraulic fluid right here. That percent of hydrochloric acid is maybe 10%, while downwells is 12%. Well, you know, and all of them are just slightly different percentages. Well, in the industry, that becomes a proprietary knowledge because each one of them is going to claim that my product is better, only because the percentages are different. Well, there's a national trend right now for the industry to be more transparent in this whole process. We have the chemicals that we have listed on our site. I did go through them this afternoon. They are basically your material safety data sheets that come along with every chemical. Probably every fire department in every county has a copy of the MSDS sheets or has ready access to the chemical sheets. So there's a whole slew of chemicals out there. And I believe there is a trend. I mean, we've had companies say they don't have a problem listing the chemicals on the site. And that's why they're there.
Okay, Jim, you want to comment on chemicals that we know about?
I heard
Or other
chemicals,
ones?
I heard chemicals, I heard water, I heard economics.
Let's stay with chemicals
Well,
for now.
I'd like to address the economic question at some point. But I think it's,
Okay, start with chemicals.
so, look, the process is water and chemical intensive, right? You start with the water, either on site or truck it in. If you truck it in, you're gonna have 1,000 trucks per frac for 21 days. So you bring it in, you mix it, you put it under high pressure. It goes down into down the borehole, it starts moving laterally. Okay. 30 to 70% of the 20 million gallons after it's exploded and after the pipes are perforated goes into the rock, helps the explosion. 30 to 70% of that comes back up as flowback. All right. So you got 6 million, or excuse me, you got maybe out of 20 million gallons, you got 5 million gallons, or 10 million down the hole, and 10 out just on average. So you've got to get rid of that. The first thing that happens is it comes up, it's piped into storage tanks. Because of the chemicals and the pressure, it is vented. All right? So whatever's there is being vented into the atmosphere. The University of Colorado Denver did a study on the eastern slope of some these deeper horizontal frac wells, and found VOC levels in the air and except volatile organics. That's like hydrocarbon type stuff. In the air exceeding the air quality levels in Colorado. All right? So that's a serious health threat. Then what happens next? Well, some of it's in the ground. It's supposed to be safe, isolated. Well, okay, let's assume it's isolated. We just took that out of the hydrologic cycle at a time when we're in drought. Now, I'm not saying one well is going to make a difference on whether you get to go fishing and drive your boat out of the harbor in Frankfurt. But we already are low, so it shifts the entire analysis. So, and those chemicals down there make it useless. You're not going back down there and getting it. And then, of course, there's the uncertainty of the fractures, which is another issue, not necessarily chemical, except that there are hazardous substances. And they are not at safe levels. Okay, some are, and some are not. And then you have to take them from the storage tank, truck them, right? So now you got a whole bunch of truck trips going somewhere else and putting it into an injection well. And the state is using brine injection wells. The industry think it's just, they just call it brine flowback. Like it's always been brine flowback, so it gets to qualify for these wells. We probably need some regulations to begin to more carefully distinguish between brine disposal and deep horizontal fracking, chemical mix, water mixture disposal. And we need to do that. On the chemicals themselves, I mean, I could give you a list. If you want to look, I got it here. I'm taking time. But I mean, just to give you a few, methanol, diesel, naphthalene, xylene, that's part of the petroleum BTEX combination. Hydrochloric acid was mentioned. Toluene, that's part of BTEX. Ethylbenzene, diethanolamine, means and enes and icks and all kinds of stuff here. So you can look at it. And there are several other reports that have these chemicals in. And I don't want to overstate it. It is a risk, but they're not being disclosed. We don't know the actual percentage. We're guessing because of the proprietary secret. Material safety data sheets work like this. There's a federal law that says under the Right to Know Act, you have to file with your community and the state any hazardous chemicals at certain levels being used in your process. If it doesn't reach the level, you don't even have to disclose it. That's one issue. Then there are several of these chemicals exempt from the material safety right to know law. So, you know, they're on the list. So those you'll never find out about. And then within the material safety data sheet law, the state of Michigan just requires the filing of the data sheets after the thing is completed. They've already got the mixture and put it in the hole. We don't know what the actual mixture is. It's done all at once, so fast, that if there is a release, the purpose of the data sheets is if somebody's injured, and this is good. I applaud the state for taking steps to do this, because it's safe, they know what the heck is there if somebody's injured, or if there's a release. That's a good thing. But the fact of the matter is, it is not entirely addressed, because we don't know. On the question of what should the state do, the question was from Peter, can the state require this? There is a proprietary secret problem under the federal law. It's called federal preemption. If the federal law preempts the states from asking for certain information. However, the states have a duty under existing law to consider and determine all likely environmental effects on air, water, natural resources, public use, and health before they approve a permit. The Michigan Environmental Protection Act, passed in 1970, as interpreted by the Michigan Supreme Court in a Vanderploot case in 1974, which remains the law of the state. It's been upheld by subsequent cases, says the state has to do this. If they're going to, companies do business in this state, and John agrees, he's the land guy, it's up to the companies to get their permits. You know, I agree with him. The companies, we should say, that's the duty. These are the rules here. Either play by our rules or go somewhere else. Right? It's not anti-fracking, it's protection of public health and the environment. It's not anti-energy to do that. So the other thing is that the state, a lot of the activity, and Mel, I'd love to have some insights from you on this because I don't know the percentage, but I would guess that most of the activity is taking place on state land, most of the permits, from what I've reviewed, for the deep horizontal stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think it is, basically. We're releasing millions of acres every year of our 4 million acres of state land, all right? We're the property owner. Our government represents us as property owners. We're the taxpayers under the Constitution of public property, right? And so, if you're going to sell somebody a right to put a driveway over your land so they can get to the beachfront property that is the magic goal, okay, don't you have a right to know what the heck's going over that property and how it's going to be done before you sell the right? Yeah. So, if the companies have no leverage whatsoever under the right to know law on these chemicals, on state leased lands, which is where all the action is, all we have to say is, it's our land, you give us the information, we'll give you the lease. Assuming they can deal with all the other issues, of course. So we have lots of questions to answer, and I agree with what John said about study. That was my main point earlier. We aren't even close to knowing the answers, and we need to slow this thing down and shut it down. It's not hurting jobs or economy right now. There's plenty of natural gas in the country. The hydro deep fracking is about 2% of the natural gas supply. And the economics of this thing, we'll talk about that in a bit, I'm sure.
Okay, let's go to water usage, and let's give the mic to Mel. We have a lot of questions about water usage. And a number of them ask about an analysis tool use, let me see if I can, a little, vary the questions here.
Peter,
Yeah, go ahead, you
do,
follow on that, John.
But I just wanted to follow up what Jim said. Oil companies shy away from doing business in this state because it's a tough place to do business. And that's a good thing. I mean, I think that's says a lot about what we do here. Of course, we do have the largest freshwater spot probably on the planet, and it needs to be protected. So I'm like I say, I'm on board. And the restrictions are such that Chevron and other big players walk away from doing business here as opposed to other places. And so good on us for doing what we can to protect that. Just wanted to support it.
John, could you keep the microphone? Jim's point about a landowner saying, I want to know what you're going to do, or I'm not going to sign a deal. Do you ever deal with a savvy landowner who has smart attorneys who says, here's what we want, and unless you want to meet our terms?
All the time. All the
Okay.
time.
And so, do they sign those leases?
Yeah, eventually. I mean, from the oil company's point of view, it makes sense. You guys you want to get the best deal you can, right? And then if you go into somebody who is more savvy, who hires a guy like Jim or a gal that's a smart attorney, or somebody who knows more, yes, there's a lease, and then there's a lease with 40 addendums to it, so that all those things are protected. I've done them both.
Full transparency?
Yeah,
Full
yeah,
disclosure.
absolutely. Now, the chemical question is a good one, and I'll readily admit I'm dancing up here. Last time I danced was with Mel, Swing Ship with the Stars, so a long time. But I mean, I don't know. That's a really good question. I've heard all sorts of things about the chemicals. You know, what are they doing? What is it? How dangerous are they? But I would like that. That's a we issue. And I think full transparency is a great idea, and we should do that. But in terms of a lease, yes, I've run into people who make you go through a lot of hoops before you do, as Jim says, before you even step 1 foot on the property. All those terms are met, and I'm sure some of you have signed those kind of leases.
Okay, Joe Mel, here's the question. How is the water resource assessment tool, maybe you could explain what that is, protecting the public health, safety, and environment for the 42 million gallons of drinking water removed from the aquifer in Excelsior Township in Kalkaska County?
First of all, let me clarify that when John said we last danced, that was
But not
with
together.
that respective
No.
partner.
Not that there's anything wrong.
There's been a lot of concern about Great Lakes waters, for the last quarter century. It's how the water has been of primary concern, especially to the Michigan people, because we're surrounded by and blessed by the fresh water that we have here. So it's been a work in progress, not only at the national level, but also in the regional level. The states have been working on things, and Michigan itself has been working on things. When this horizontal drilling came into play big time a couple of years ago, we, as our division, looked at this impact that it would have here. And we recognized that there was going to be the need for large volumes of fresh water. We've changed our forms that are used. When they apply for a permit, they have to let us know whether you expect to use a large volume of fresh water in your operations. If they check that mark that says they will, we have on our Michigan.gov website, you can go in and it's just simply called, if you search for water withdrawal analysis tool, it will come up and take you to a site. When they check this application, we go in and we enter the data because there's been concern about the impact that this would have on our freshwater system. And it's not so much the impact it would have on us as people, but it has more to do with how it would impact our wildlife and our fisheries system. And what it does is it'll analyze the water volume that would be taken. You throw it into this magic little formula and you enter all of this data. And if the result shows that you, by pulling X amount of volumes of water, will cause the water level in that area to be lowered, or if you cause the freshwater system in the area to have a reduction in flow, then we have a concern. At that point, we even have, we do not have to issue the permit, especially if you exceed certain levels. But with that tool, we're able to let the companies know right up front that the volume of water you're expected to take is going to have an adverse impact on the resources, our water resources. Right, and so we continue, and again, before we do the preliminary work, and then before the company actually is allowed to use it, they have to go in and do a more in-depth study analysis of it also, to confirm the numbers that we have. And
I think this question is specifically about water use over capacity. Now, did these 42 million gallons, I think that's maybe three wells?
I believe one of them used 21 million.
Okay.
One well.
Did these wells?
I didn't cover that well, but my associate did. And if they proposed to use 21 million gallons, it was thrown into that water analysis, water withdrawal analysis tool. Then showed that
You don't know how that tool actually responded
in that particular situation, I do not know. But it would not have shown that it was going to negatively impact the water resources in the area.
Okay. Jim, do you want to comment?
Yeah, this is a real important area to understand. I wish I had my slides, but I'm going to just picture this scenario, or this listing of how it works. The water withdrawal tool was a way in which the state of Michigan could comply with the Great Lakes Compact requirement for high-capacity wells, 1 and 2 million gallons per day, mainly 2 million gallons. So, by contrast, the Nestle well, which caused harm by dropping the flow of a significant stream and 2 small lakes by the stream, 28% according to the judge, 35% in the summer, and for about a half mile downstream, it was missing 2 to 4 inches according to the facts in the case and the findings of the trial court judge. And the lakes dropped anywhere from 2 to 4 to 6 inches if they would have pumped at 400 gallons per minute. That's a half mile away. And if you looked at the cone of depression, which is, the bore goes down like this, there's real high capacity. The cone starts at the bottom of the bore where all the pressure is. Here's the bore. So it's sucking like this. It brings a cone. As it goes out, the influence goes up, right? The water table keeps coming down as long as there's influence out here. So it's a cone like that. And this, at the Nestle, it dropped 6 inches, I want to get this right, 2 inches, I think it was a mile out, 6 inches, a half a mile out. All right, at models predicting at 400 gallons per minute, based on some test data at 750 gallons per minute, it was earlier. So, in effect, any lake or stream within that cone of depression could be impacted. So you have to understand the hydrology of that. That's what goes on. By comparison, if you're going to have 21 million gallons for one frac, you're doing 1 million gallons a day. That's 2.5 times what Nestle was doing. So you have to, right? So we're talking something here we need to know more about. That was all actual data, not the water assessment tool. And if we hadn't had the data in the assessment tool, Jeff Jocks in our office ran the Nestle case through the assessment tool. The Nestle case went all the appellate courts and came back and was settled, and they had to reduce pumping from 400 to an average of 125 in the summer months and 200 in the winter months or so. And So imagine that had to happen there. If you're doing 1 million gallons a day, okay, and that's 1 million gallons a day for 21 days. In the Nestle case, once the test well at 750 gallons a minute, a day, they did that for up to 7 days. In the 5th day, the stream dropped by 65% of flow, 1/2 mile down from the well field. Okay? So this stuff needs to be understood with baseline data beforehand that is given in addition to the assessment tool. So you use that data, not the assumption in the assessment tool. And I'm sorry to take long, but you got to go through the steps or you don't get it. So the next point of the tool is based on an assumption of, you know, I don't know, 12 or so, or 18 USGS gauges in the major rivers of Michigan around the state. Grayling, for example, there's one near Grayling with 150 square miles up of the watershed above that measuring point. So here's the point in the stream, 150 square miles. In one case, where the state wanted to put 1 million gallons a day into the headwaters of a creek, this is the reverse, but it's a harm case. The state used the underlying assumptions of that assessment tool. This is what they did even before the tool. It's like, okay, if the flow is 10,000 gallons per minute in the Osamo River with 150 square miles, then at where the high capacity well is up here, with a watershed of 10 square miles, then that's 1/10 of 10,000, so it would be 1,000 gallons per minute. In fact, in that case, the flow, when actually done in the field, was only about 50 to 150 to 200 gallons per minute. It was overstated by 200 to 1,000%, according to the testimony of the judge, in that particular case. Do you understand what I'm saying? There is no relationship between the data and the assumptions made on these few measuring points in the streams. It understates, it overstates the amount of water, and therefore understates the harm.
So Jim, who would fix that? Is that a legislative, is that created by legislative action, or are these the decisions of department staff?
Two things.
Quick,
Yeah, I
we
mean,
move on.
yeah, there's a groundwater council. The governor's going to reinstitute it. You need to work with the groundwater council and get this change. It would take a legislative change. The water assessment tool is a legislative tool, but behind that is that Michigan Environmental Protection Act duty to prevent harm. So independent of the tool, citizens can insist that the baseline data be supplied before these permits are issued, and that the number of wells at the pad should be disclosed. It's one well at a time. Now here's the other trick that went on. The oil and gas wells are exempt from the water assessment tool. All right? So the department did a wonderful thing by saying, and Hal Fitz, I don't know if Hal signed the order, great, but they did the right thing. They said, you're using the assessment tool if you're going to have a permit. And they are using the assessment tool by and large, what I understand. The rub is that the directive for them to use the assessment tool does not require them to they don't have to keep the data of the first well in the computer. So each well is just like it's 21 million gallons at a time, not 2142. Now we're getting to the question, or 84, right? Or 168. It doesn't look at the cumulative impacts. It misses it. The fourth problem is that the definition of impact, called adverse resource impact, is, if you look at the it sounds great. They don't get a permit to cause adverse resource impact. You and I, and all of us, would say, wow, gee, the stream has dropped 2 inches, that's adverse resource impact. No, the statute says, to get to the ARI, the adverse resource impact, you got to kill 5% of the characteristic fish population in a cold water stream. Now, 2% in the good ones, to be fair about this, 5% in most, and in some cases, on warm streams, you can take up to 25% of the flow of the stream, for God's sakes, and the legislature said that wasn't an adverse resource impact. This is what's been going on in this state, in this country, for a little bit too long. Because a lot of us in this room weren't raised on that. Anyway, I'm not talking fact now.
Okay, we have about 15 minutes at this point. Now, I had a question in here, and Jim's raising a lot of issues related to measuring and metrics, and someone had asked, does the state really have the staff to properly administer all this stuff?
Next question.
No, we need more, so. You know, actually, several years ago, when the election play was going gangbusters, I think we issued a record number of some 12 or 1,300 permits in 1 year. Last year, I think we issued less than 200. It's a reflection of what's happening with the industry. There are bigger plays out in the Dakotas, the Wyomings, Louisiana, Pennsylvania, so oil industry is like that. You go where the action is. And unfortunately for Michigan right now, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, Michigan's not the place to be right now. Are we understaffed at this point, being that we issued less than 200 permits last year? I don't believe we are understaffed. The staff that we have in place, I think they do an exceptional job. We are assigned our respective counties, and we basically take or regulate the industry from cradle to grave. Could we use more staff? Absolutely. There's always projects that fall behind. Sure, we could use more people, but when you drop from 1,200 and able to get it done down to 200, it doesn't appear that we need more staff. But there's more to what we do than just issuing permits. You know, we have, like I said, I believe it's 18 to 20,000 wells here in the state of Michigan. And those, we have inspection quotas that we're to do on each one of these wells. There are hundreds of facilities out there that we inspect. There is groundwater contamination that has occurred because of oil and gas industry, so we're monitoring those cleanups also. So
I had a few questions about those here. People want to know of a particular instance where hydraulic fracturing has been definitively tied to groundwater contamination. And there were a couple that asked about a well in Joyfield Township, which has been referred to as perhaps the only instance of a fractured well failing in the state or in this region.
the well you're referring to is down in Joyfield Township. It's called the Hard D1-34, drilled by Precision Engine West out of Traverse City. This is happened 2 years ago this past February. They did do, it's a shallow antrim gas well, only about, 1,600 feet in depth, I guess. Typical antrim, straight hole, go down, perforate it, do a little fraction job, and put it on production. Well, on this particular well, something unusual occurred, and we're actually still investigating it because it's such an unusual event that after they had fractured it, perforated and fractured it, they do what they call is a flowback, and that's where the water and the chemicals and stuff flow back to tanks. Well, in an antrim well with low pressure, it just kind of bubbles out and just kind of flows back to the tank very slowly. Well, during this process here, the site is normally manned 24 hours during this period. The guy who was on site had checked it several hours into the evening, and I believe late as midnight or so, and after that I believe he took a nap in his truck or something, or left the site or something, but when he checked in the morning, there was a little bubbling occurring on the outside of the well. And this is They did analysis of the fluids. It was recognized that it was the same fluids that were coming up the well bore. So there was some communication that had occurred outside of the casing, and somewhere between the casing and the cement jar. After much concern by our department and by Presidium, it was decided that we had somehow caused, or Presidium had caused, possibly a microannulus leak or a channel of some sort that came up along the well bore, which allowed some fluids to come back up to the surface. It was just a day or two later, after we sat down and tried to figure out what to do about it, we did cement off the upper perforations, which stopped any flow that was coming back up from either up the well or up the backside. We run several different types of logs. Logs is various tools downhole where you send out sound waves and gamma rays and everything else, and you listen behind the well bore and the casings and stuff, and do every kind of test you can possibly think of to try to figure out what had taken place here. We're still in that point of trying to analyze this thing. We know that we did stop the flow to surface. What we did in the meantime is we knew where the direction of the groundwater flow was near that well bore. So we did have Presidium put in a monitoring well, but actually in the base of the drift, which is the drift is just gravel and sand and stuff all the way down to a solid formation. They ran a monitoring well all the way down to the base of the drift. Periodically on the way down, they stopped and grabbed samples and have come up with no indication that the chemicals or the contaminant had penetrated the freshwater zone. We did have them keep a monitor well. It's still out there on the well site, posted, I believe it's about 50 or 60 feet away from the well, down into the water table. The water table in that area is about, I believe about 300 or 350 feet. So we do have a monitor well in place that the Presidium is checking periodically to see if any kind of contaminants ever do show up. Nothing has showed up today. We are still in the process of trying to make sense of this. What Presidium did out there was generally what they have done on the other wells that they had drilled in the area. We analyzed the other wells in the area, and not to the extent that we did on the Hart well, but we looked at all of the data, and everything is the same. Are there additional tools that we can go in and do some analyzing? It'd be hard at this point. Maybe some other tools that we could have used, we possibly should have used before we cemented it off. Should we have taken more time to fully analyze instead of going right in and plugging it out? Well, at that point, we weren't exactly sure what was happening, so rather than risk this formation fluid contaminating the fresh water in the glacial bedrock or the glacial drift, we elected to go in and cement off those upper perfs in that particular well. So that is what is happening over on the Harts. Was there a second part or first part?
Well, you had first mentioned that we have some instances of groundwater contamination in
Well,
wells.
I meant we do have groundwater contamination, but they're more from spills that occur at the surface. You know, anytime you have a brine tank or an oil tank, and you have flow lines that go from the well over to the facility and the facility over to a disposal well, because the majorities are underground flow lines, and some majority are made of steel. A lot of them are nowadays the low pressure ones are PVC type of flow lines. So we do have spills occasionally, periodically, and so it's more groundwater contamination cases that have occurred as a result of the normal production cycle of the well. Nothing that has occurred as a result of hydrofracking.
know James going to want to comment on this. John, did you want to say anything about the issue of contamination? Okay.
Well, I don't have a lot to say other than I make a couple of observations. One is, it's because of the scale of the deep hydrofracking, the thing you have to ask is, it's not, a lot of people will say, a lot of artists say, there's not been one contamination caused by the technology itself. Well, you know, a race car sitting in the parking lot before it's driven is not endangered anyway. But if you drive that excessively, you know, push the limit, so to speak, like a deep fracking technology without knowing what these risks are, then what happens is, what Mel says is right. A lot of these problems are in the casing or surface spills. I mean, or in the pipeline. That's been the case just about in every situation that I know. Truck spills once in a while. But, so the problem is you're dealing with volumes more when you're dealing with the water and the chemical fluids and dealing with those higher risks. Both putting them down in the hole and then handling when the 30 to 70% of it comes back up. It's not that it can't be done. It's just that the risks are far greater, so we have a responsibility to understand what these are. And I don't know, have any of the deep wells had to be shut in? Do you know about? For the hydrofrac wells, for casing failure or joint failure? Because I heard one was. I forget the name of it, but I haven't. But sometimes when you have more, you know, if you have 5,000 feet of pipe, that's one number. That's a lot of pipe. They're in sections, right? And then you have the casing outside. We don't have the diagram up here, but you have to seal the joints. And Mel knows more about that than I do. But there has to be there's cement on the outside, and then there's some sealing the joints. And if the joints fail, you have a release. And I don't know if that's what happened in the Hardy thing, but if the joints fail, and when you're dealing with the deeper wells, and you know, 2 miles this way and 2 miles that way, you have a lot more joints. You know, the risks start increasing with a lot more water and a lot more chemicals. I mean, that's the concern I have about that. But, yeah, so I'll just stop.
Okay, this is a question for John. We just have a couple more minutes. How will the economic benefits of fracking not be transient like those of many other energy resources from the past?
Thanks, man.
It had your name on it. These guys have been hogging the mics.
I'll try to answer it this way. I heard some applause for the idea the oil companies are not here in Michigan, so that we're not drilling any wells. And I'll go back to what I said initially. When Jim talks about risks for fracking and the chemicals, you know, all of it, like, you know, you can feel the vibe up here on this. My question is, do you have the same passion about that when somebody starts wanting to build a coal plant? Do you still, yeah, that's the same passion.
Stop it.
Good girl. All right. Do you have when when I think the company came in here and wanted to do a turbine project? There was a lot of resistance to that, to the point where we stopped it. We stopped it. That happened here in Benzie County. I tried to lease land in this county for wind and got my butt kicked. Okay? So then you have to kind of go big picture on this. You can complain about the oil companies, and yes, there's lots of reason to do that, but they're not saints. But you can't complain about that. You can't stop coal. You can't do all. I mean, there is no magic bullet out there. So when you're talking about transient issues or effects, I don't have one. Nobody in here has one.
I do.
What is that?
It's conservation.
Well, okay,
I
that's,
consume water at the same rate that sub-Saharan people do.
okay,
We don't have to
Well-
live this shit we've been living.
okay, that's a wonderful, I'm with you, but you're gonna have to do some serious educating to a population that's pretty lazy and doesn't want to take the steps necessary to do a lot of things we all probably would agree with. We all gonna get in our cars tonight and go home. That's a fossil fuel, I'm sorry, I'm sure, I don't think anybody's riding their bike tonight, or they're taking a horse and buggy. I'm guessing, I'm gonna bet money on that.
I won't.
Okay, well, that's great. You're making choices, and I think that's really what it gets down to. Conservation is a huge part of it. Carol and I were talking about that in the way tonight. I am all over that. So I hold my hands up and I go, you know, we need the folks at the state of Michigan to be diligent about watching and protecting us. We need to do this. We need to have discussion. We need Jim busting people's butts about water use. I'm all for it. But I also think he's right. Jim said it best. You can do this development of natural gas and not, you know, ruin the environment, hopefully. I mean, that's what we're trying to get to. And ultimately, natural gas is cleaner. So.
John, could you, a question here related to this, since you're talking about our lifestyle, or you're gonna get your chance, don't worry. Yes, and you can.
Environment.
Yes. So this person is wondering, are we exporting this gas?
Yes, we're exporting, not here in Michigan, but the Marcellus Shale, the stuff in Pennsylvania and Utica, they're getting about, I've heard numbers of $16 to $18 an MCF, and there's a constant conga line of ships taking natural gas, and Japan's buying our natural gas right now.
You mean we're destroying our land in Michigan to sell this
No.
and make money on it?
No. No, I'm just talking about, I don't think any natural gas in Michigan is going
Well,
to Japan.
all right, other states in our country,
Huh?
are this to make money on, or is this to help us in our lives?
Well, you know, this is a fairly complicated thing. We're living in a capitalist system. I can't do anything about
Hey, I
that.
know
right now.
about that.
I can't do anything about that. You know, people are doing things to make money. And don't get me started on that. I don't know what the answer is there. People are doing things for profit. That's what they do. That's what we're... And again, I'm not making a judgment. That's just the system we're living in. So we don't have a market where the infrastructure for natural gas in this country is now being rebuilt, retooled. Thank God we're moving the pipeline from the tar sands, which you know, that's a problem too. And we're not going through the big aquifer in Nebraska. I mean, this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to have adult, intelligent discussions. Thank God for Jim that he's doing this and he's putting these questions in. I'm not sitting here, I told you when I started, I'm not sitting here as an advocate for the oil and gas industry. I'm sitting as an advocate for us. And I happen to believe that in the transition period, natural gas is not bad if you combine it with wind, which you guys here in this county said no to, and solar. You know, I mean, there's answers out here. And natural gas is a part of the solution, a part.
Could you just clarify, are you saying that the distribution network for gas in Michigan is significantly different than in Pennsylvania or New York?
Yes, Michigan, we could be, Texas likes to talk about how they could secede and have everything, we could do that here. We have every bit of energy source possible. We have a great pipeline system in this state, we do. It's set up,
And we use most of our gas that's produced here.
I think we've just finally got natural gas and coal are now 50-50 in this state. We finally got to that level here in the state and here and around the country. We're closer to 50-50 than we've been maybe forever. So we have the infrastructure here. I'm talking about nationwide. I'm part of a pipeline project now that's 1,400 miles from West Virginia to Texas. And we're, you know, dealing with the same stuff. You know, people don't want it in their backyard. They don't want that natural gas pipeline. So it's tough, kids. It's a tough. There's no easy solution. And if you're coming in here thinking there's gonna be,
You're kidding yourself. You're kidding yourself. I wish there was. I wish I had a magic bullet. You know, movie Switch talks about a cell phone. Pull out your cell phone, and if we could make a battery the size of that cell phone to run your car, you would take 25 years to transition everybody's car to use that battery. Stuff that doesn't happen overnight. And it takes discussion, and it takes education, both of which we're not doing a very good job of doing right now. We don't seem to want to talk as adults anymore, and we don't seem to really want to put much emphasis on being very smart. So I can't do anything about that. I'd like to think that we could do better than we do on both of those issues.
Okay, Jim, we're going to wrap up here, so.
Well, what I'd like to do is talk about some of these bigger things from what I'm not holding myself out as an expert in the economic side of this, but we've been looking at some of these things, and there are a couple of things that seem to be unfolding worldwide and then nationally, which affects us here in Michigan. Gas is fungible. When it goes into the transmission line that's part of the national system, it's fungible, okay? The laws don't allow us. Michigan would have to reclaim and pass laws through the Public Service Commission to reclaim the distribution system, to keep the gas here, to keep the risk here, take care of our own needs with perhaps no deep horizontal fracking. It isn't our need is deep horizontal fracking here. One example let's take this now. John has said a couple of things about, natural gas is a bridge fuel. It should be it has to be. We need base energy. It certainly isn't coal. And I don't agree that it's coal versus natural or deep horizontal fracking.
No.
Right? John, but you've kept saying if we
I
don't get this, we're going to get coal.
No.
If we don't get coal,
It's much too late for us to start a debate.
Coal is off the table. The long-term view of coal is it's gone. New York Times articles have said it's gone. We can't go there as a world. Yeah, China's going there, and we got some major problems, and we're talking about sending coal to China. And China is going all over the world, including North America, buying up huge coal reserves. So that's a problem. But likewise, natural gas, for example, in Devon Energy, who came in, who's another big player in Michigan, and I think they're going to pack up, but I'm not sure.
Gone. They're gone.
Yeah, they're gone. And one of the reasons they're gone is they sold a third of it to a Chinese company. Third of the interest. It went to another company, and then China bought a third of that company. And I've got the graph here somewhere, or the chart. Now, how does that work? China's going to export natural gas that is a deep frac well, at the kind of risk we're talking about here. And who makes that decision, and why isn't that decision part of the decision-making process at the front end? Why? Well, you have the North American Free Trade Agreement between the three countries in North America. Then you've got the complications of the Treaty on General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, which has been amended several times. There are some problems here we haven't straightened out. That's why I'm saying earlier, local economy and local energy is a very important part of the mix for our future. And it might be natural gas local. Managed well. One wind generator, for example, could run the 250 homes in Beulah. One good wind generator. It doesn't have to be one like Duke proposed. You just have to do that. So there's a lot of things. Natural gas, one of the things being talked about, and you've heard about LNG, that's liquid natural gas, and the prospects of America exporting. And I think some of the hyperfrac marginal states, like Michigan, where the natural gas price is low, they're not sure about what the rate of return of gas is here yet. So it's pretty risky. The way you recover your investment is find an export. Call it a natural resource, you got the investment, claim NAFTA and GATT international trade law, and defy anybody from from taking it. So the problem with the liquid gas situation is a national policy of exporting it, is that it drives up the price, okay? And that makes it more friendly for doing deep horizontal fracking. The good part, the downside is the costs that go with it. The upside is sometimes profit can force other technologies or means of doing the fracking that don't have, like there's a fracking method, for example, that didn't leave chemicals in the ground, that didn't have the spills, you know, there are numerous means and methods that we probably haven't thought of yet, that if put into place, would also change the playing field and perhaps make natural gas a player. Now, we didn't talk about another problem of natural gas, and that is that it is a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And the theory has been, well, we keep gas in the pipes. We don't have to worry about it ever escaping. The problem is, I don't know what the percentage is, my memory says 5 or 7% or so escapes. And in North Dakota, where we're doing fracking for oil, they burn everything through the flares. All the gas, they don't mind that. They don't mind the gas there. It's not worth it. It's just junk. So those are just some comments on the big picture. It's very complicated. The economy of renewable energy, most of the articles are saying, if we can get this bridge, and I'm not a believer big time in the bridge, but we got to have base power, and natural gas right now is better than coal, as John says. But I think we got a window of about 10 to 15 years. And then we've got to have the renewable energy economy, and all that means, which basically all the studies are saying, this country will lead the world economically like it has in the past. Not that I'm, saying, oh, the American dream, I'm just saying, the jobs, whatever country moves to renewable energy and conservation and the technology and the entrepreneurship, whatever country does that first wins the economy for this century and the next. That's what all the studies are saying, including Lloyd's of London.
Okay, Mel, do you want to get in the last word? You go the first word, you can in the last word.
Number one, I want to thank everyone for coming out this evening. Anytime we can sit down and talk about this type of thing, I think it's a great opportunity. The Office of Oil and Gas and Minerals, we have participated, I believe, in over 100 of these over the last year throughout the state. We understand fracturing is a concern of our citizens of the state, and while we recognize that we've been doing it for 50 years here in the state of Michigan, we're more than willing to take an opportunity to sit down and discuss fracturing with each and every one if we have to. I would just like to say that I think all of our geologists and all of our staff that work within our division, they're committed to the protection of our safety, our health, and the environment of the state of Michigan. And I think they're all committed to that, and they would do whatever they can to protect it. We are handed a book of rules that deal with drilling, permitting, water withdrawal, groundwater contamination, and we take our job seriously. And I think I feel comfortable that I believe you guys are in good hands. But I appreciate this opportunity to sit down and talk with you. And if there are ever any future ones, I'd be more than glad to come and talk with you also. Thank you.
Okay, thanks to the panel.
All right, it is getting late. We'd like to get you out of here as soon as we can. Have a couple of quick comments, if you'll bear with me. A couple of quick announcements. John did mention that there was a kind of sorely lacking good conversation, intelligent conversation. I think tonight in Benzie County we proved that we can have intelligent conversation. Thank you for that. You can give yourselves a round of applause. Thanks a lot. Also, want to thank a fantastic panel the Conservation District is having its annual spring seedling sale. You can find us online at benzece.org, so check that out. Also, the Benzie County Water Council is having its third annual Water Fest Friday, April 12th at Benzie Central High School. There are handouts in the back, and I think Josh and some other folks with seeds have some save the date information. And finally, where do we go with all this? That was a lot of information, and it's a highly, highly complicated issue, as we all found out tonight. If you want to contact your representative in the state, the League of Women Voters have these green guides at the back. You can grab one on your way out, and it has all the contact information. And let your representatives know how you feel about this very, very important issue. Again, thank you very much for showing up tonight, for coming out. We'll see you next time.